Welcome to our first virtual training of the new year, new administration, new Congress. There are some new faces and new names, so welcome to our advocacy committee, to our advocacy team. Today, we are going to be hosting a relatively informal training session for virtual congressional meetings. And we're also going to be talking about how at the outset of the year, we plan to generate support for the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So today, my goal is for each of you to leave our session feeling comfortable and excited to enter these congressional meetings. I want you to feel confident in the tools and resources that you've been provided, feeling like you can fall back on these resources if you're ever stuck. Moreover, you're prepared to advocate, you're ready and excited to go. Here is what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to offer a general meeting structure, what to expect when you're in a virtual congressional meeting. We're going to give an overview of what H.Res.30 actually is. We'll host a bit of an open forum, open discussion, solicit some general feedback about advocacy tips, best practices, and then we'll move into a breakout group activity to put these ideas into practice. Before we get started, I want to launch a quick poll just to take a temperature check. So you should be able to see a poll in front of you now. Have you ever participated in congressional advocacy before? Yes, virtually, yes, in person, both virtually and in person, no, or you're not sure. We'll take a minute to respond to that. All right, let's take another 15 seconds. All right. As you can see, we have a good mix here. The majority have not participated before, so perfect. This is a great way to start getting your feet wet. But we're also very fortunate to have some tried and true experts in both virtual and in-person advocacy with us here today. So lots to learn, not necessarily from me, but from us as a group. First and foremost, especially if you're new to congressional advocacy meetings, you might be wondering, what should I expect? When are these meetings taking place? Now, typically throughout the year, our plan is to have all meetings pre-scheduled before we host a training. Now, because of the Senate impeachment trial, there was some, I'm trying to find the most diplomatic word, uncertainty about how the coronavirus relief package was going to be pushed through. Because of these circumstances, meetings are going to be confirmed on a rolling basis. What does this mean for you? Likely every Monday in February, you'll get a meeting saying, these are the meetings we've already had, these are the meetings we have coming up within the next couple of weeks, and then you'll opt in or confirm your attendance by email. So if you participated with us in August, it's very much the same system. Hopefully, as we move forward in the year, we'll be able to have all of those meetings confirmed up front. In the meantime, this is what you can expect. Who are we meeting with? Throughout the year, we will be meeting with representatives from the House and the Senate across our jurisdiction, the National Capital Area. That includes Maryland, DC, and parts of Northern Virginia. For February, and specifically for H.Res.30, we'll be starting with the House, not only because this resolution is within the House, but also because of, again, said aforementioned impeachment trial in the Senate. Now, how can I prepare for these meetings? The best thing to do is to review the materials we're going to share with you today, and we'll continue to share. Those are talking points, those are sample scripts, making sure you feel really comfortable and confident talking about any topic that you're going into these meetings to advocate for, and also connecting with your team in advance. You'll know well before your meeting who the other participants are going to be. So whether it's touching base via email in advance, touching base 15 minutes before the meeting, just to get situated, who's doing the introduction, who's delivering the core ask, etc. Those two agenda items are really going to be key to making sure you feel prepared to participate. And finally, we'll be breaking this down a little more in depth, but what can I expect during a meeting itself? You'll have some introduction, some context as to who you are, what organization you're with. They'll be delivering the core ask, whether that's supporting a piece of legislation, supporting full funding for the UN. Be prepared to answer questions from the staffer or the legislator, and make sure you have a plan for follow-up. This includes not only sending an email to thank the person for their time for meeting with you, but also who in your group is going to be responsible for keeping track or working with our office to keep track of whether the resolution has been co-sponsored, for example, so that we're all working together to follow up, offer some gentle reminders, offer additional resources if they're still undecided on a certain bill or resolution or what have you. During the meeting, breaking it down a little more, these are really the key concepts to keep in mind. When we're talking about an introduction, we won't only go around the room and introduce ourselves individually, but you also need to talk about what UNA-NCA is and what we do as a way of answering the question of, why are we here? Why are we there talking to them? You'll want to introduce the issue at hand. So for example, before the Paris Climate Agreement was rejoined by executive order, that was one of the topics that we would meet with legislators about, was to urge them to support Paris climate, to speak out against our withdrawal from the agreement. And so in addition to talking about the details of the Paris Climate Agreement itself, we also want to talk about this topic of climate change and why it's important. Now, the way to really drive that home is to connect it to a personal experience. So for me, some of you might know, I'm from Southern California, and especially in the last year, we have been plagued by really horrendous wildfires, by droughts, by mudslides. And so connecting it, especially if I'm talking to my representative as a constituent, connecting it to my personal experience and situating that within this context of talking about climate change at large, talking about the interests of the congressional district is really important. It's really personal. Making that personal appeal makes for a much more compelling and memorable engagement. It's also an opportunity to connect it to some of those more tangential issues so that we can always also connect what we're talking about to the UN agenda at large. And finally, during the meeting, it is of the utmost importance that you make your core ask. This is one ask, it must be concise, and you'll provide supporting information. So an example of a core ask is, I'm asking you to co-sponsor HRes30 for reasons X, Y, Z. And then you'll prepare to answer questions. So pretty straightforward, but it sometimes helps to have this schematic or framework in mind, especially as you're preparing, so you don't wind up feeling stuck, and there's always a flow to the conversation. It winds up feeling very natural. Now, before I move into an overview of the piece of legislation we're going to be focusing on in early spring, I want to pause here for any questions from the group about the general meeting overview and expectations. You can go ahead and unmute yourself. All right. Oh, go ahead.
Just one question about how many people will we be normally working with to host these meetings?
That is a great question. Thank you, Shivani. It truly depends on availability. I've had anywhere between 5 and 15. I'd say the ideal is 5 or 6, and it's probably the most frequent in looking back at August, just based on how availability shakes out. So that typically gives everyone, you have one person to do the introduction, you've got 2 people to talk about the issues, one who can deliver the core ask, and one who can, tag team with maybe another to answer questions. What's important is you'll know going into the meeting how many to expect, so that if perchance there are 10 people, 12 people who've signed up to participate in one meeting, and they're all constituents, meaning they're all sort of priority for that meeting, the office will step in also to help facilitate making sure everyone's on the same page, making sure that everyone knows what the expectations are and feel prepared to discuss in an equal way. Great question. Any others before we move ahead?
Serena? Steve?
Yes. Hi, Steve.
Hi. Are you expecting that this resolution is the only focus of the congressional entreaties or relationships in the spring, rather than the broader set of interest in making sure that some of the missing pieces for funding of the UN get back on the agenda, from UNESCO to UNRWA to others, things that are so important with the change in administration, to begin a renewed discussion of those things that have been off the table pretty much for 2.5 to 3 years.
Right. That's a great point, and something that we'll also break down later in the presentation. Just repeating in case anyone had some trouble hearing Steve, he's asking about whether this is an opportunity to also talk about other key issues within the UN agenda. So lack of funding for UNESCO, even UNFPA. It absolutely is. We'll talk about the details of H.Res.30, but the way that these meetings are set up is so that you can deliver that core ask, and you can use, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals as the context for why you're meeting. But generally these meetings are 30 minutes long. And so I've found that there is often plenty of time to also take the opportunity to discuss, yes, the SDGs are important. And, you know, we have researched the representative in advance. We know their voting record on UN related issues. And so we'll also take this opportunity to flag that we'll also be reaching back out to discuss UNESCO and what have you. And then often that prompts a conversation. It's then an opportunity for more follow-up. So I guess to restate, there is no reason to limit ourselves to being to discussing a single issue, but rather we can use that single issue or core ask as our guide for the conversation, or as the overall convening purpose for why we're having the conversation. This is a good segue now to move into an overview of what H.Res.30 actually is. This was recently introduced by Representative Barbara Lee in California. For those who might not be familiar, these are the 17 SDGs. I like to place these here because when you look at them all together, to me, it feels very apparent how interconnected each of these are. And that's part of the point that we want to drive home, not just in these meetings, but really in any advocacy that we're doing. You can't end poverty without addressing everything else here. So in other words, instead of considering these 17 unique lists, let's reformat or reconfigure our way of thinking about the SDGs such that it's one list with 17 subheadings. And these are goals, not necessarily benchmarks. And we'll start to break down what that means. The bill itself expresses support for meeting the key goals of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, specifically looking at gender equality, ending extreme poverty, and improving public health. This quote from the bill is very insightful because it refers to the SDGs as a critical blueprint to ending poverty, to protecting the planet, and to ensuring that all people can live in peace and prosperity by 2030. Now, clearly our core ask is to gain co-sponsors from within the national capital area for this resolution. Again, why? Because it's a blueprint for progress. We're falling behind on a number of these goals, not only globally, but locally. That said, there's often a misconception and there's a great deal of misinformation about the SDGs, about the Paris Climate Agreement, that these are somehow binding, that they restrict American innovation, when the reality is that we can really set our own measures and standards. It's more so an approach, a very integrated approach across disciplines, across sectors, that forces you then to confront that education, poverty, gender equity, consumption, sustainable cities. These are all inextricably linked. And that's why the text of this bill, and also in our line of thinking, if you will, within UNA NCA, is calling for the SDGs to be viewed in this manner. I'm now going to have Cade share the following resources with you in the chat. These should be in Google Docs, so you should be able to pull it up, open it now while we're in the conversation. The three resources are talking points, a sample script, and the text of the bill itself. The talking points are general bullet points that you can draw from in your conversation. So it'll break down some of this language that I'm throwing at you about blueprints and frameworks and organizing principles. And it'll also attempt to anticipate some of those misconceptions about what the US obligation to the SDGs actually looks like. A sample script is helpful if you're looking for a little bit more of a template or a little bit more of a guide for these discussions. It actually will walk you through how to present your introduction, how to deliver the core ask in context, and is very helpful to refer to, both for virtual meetings or if you're planning a call-in day and you'd like to leave a message for your representative's office. Finally, I highly, highly encourage that everyone take a look at the text of the bill itself. It's not very long, but it does spell out every single reason as to why the representative, and by extension, we believe that this is an important measure to adopt and to demonstrate and signal our support for the Sustainable Development Goals. So I'll give everyone a moment to go grab those links from the chat. We will also be circulating these after the call. All right. Keep those on your radar. We will be coming back to them for our breakout activity. Now I want to open up our discussion for best practices and advocacy tips. Like I said, we're very fortunate that we have some experienced advocates in the mix here. But before I open this up for discussion, I wanted to share a couple of my own that I've included up here. The first is something that if you've worked with me before, you've probably heard me say a million times: have a game plan. When you review the talking points and the text of the bill, when you feel comfortable with the source material, it becomes a lot easier to start anticipating resistance. I saw that Paula mentioned a tip in the chat as well, which is researching the people you're meeting with in advance. Have a sense of what their voting record looks like, if they've spoken out about UN issues before, or if maybe they're not entirely sold. This is going to not only remind you to be flexible, but it's just going to be a little easier to navigate a discussion when you know what to expect. Again, speaking to your overall comfort and confidence as you move through this process. And then finally, I'll add this little mantra that I've learned in my days as a facilitator: step up, step back. If you're in a discussion that's very dynamic, remain present in that conversation. Do you feel that you're maybe dominating the conversation? Signal it's time to take a step back. If you're sitting in the conversation, you notice that maybe you're one or two of the only people who haven't spoken up and shared your voice, step up, share why you're here, share a personal experience, talk a little bit about the issue at hand. Your voice is valuable and needed in these conversations, so don't be afraid to add it. Let me pause here. What are some other best practices and advocacy tips that we could all benefit from? Maybe Steve, I'll turn it over to you as one of our experienced advocates. And you're muted, Steve. Steve, it does look like you're still muted.
There, okay, okay, I got it. No, I'm not muted now, okay. I was stuck in your text on the side of the computer. So you were asking what are other tips to take them out? I thought you were step up and step forward and step back when things are overbearing or we're too much engaged and not letting the party we're speaking to talk about. I think the key is to have some particular information about each representative that we're meeting with and home in on a couple of things to make sure that brings out their interest and enthusiasm. Not all of the, sometimes we go in and we're talking sort of broadly, but may not be up to date on what they're most interested in right now. And of course, there's a lot going on right now. So it shouldn't be too hard to find before each meeting some of the things they've particularly spoken about or represented, and see if we can figure out how to relate what those activities are to our reasons for being there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A great point to consider, especially as you're coordinating with your group.
For instance, today, of course, Barbara Lee, I think, was confirmed to be the chair of the Foreign Affairs Appropriations Committee within the House. Is that right?
Yes, that was confirmed, great. I think just before our call today.
Okay, so we'll have a lot more news about her and also who else lines up to be related directly to appropriations in the next couple of weeks. At least I hope that's the case. That's great. Thank you.
We'll be monitoring it. Ed, if I could throw it over to you, because you've got a lot of experience with our advocacy. What are some best practices and tips that you'd share with the group?
Thanks, Shana. I think perhaps the most important thing is to relate our pitch to wherever the representative is at. It shouldn't be just only about us, but it should also be about the representative and where that representative stands. If we know, for example, that the representative supports the idea that we are pushing, then it's particularly important to express appreciation for that and encouragement for that. That's one point. Another, I think, that I would particularly stress is the follow-up at the end of the meeting. Reiterate the core ask as we walk out the door. This is what we really want. And then to follow up with an email or some kind of message afterward that sustains the contact. We want this to be more than a one-time contact. We want to have a continuing dialogue with that representative and his or her staff. Thanks.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think there's a lot of echoes, Ed, in your comment and Steve's as well. It's about building relationships. These are authentic, genuine conversations that, yes, might have a policy focus and might be substantive, but I'll never forget that before I went into my first meeting, someone also told me, you know, be prepared for it to be 60% just chit chat. You might talk about, you know, I'm from Southern California, so you might talk about the Lakers, you might talk about the Kings, you could talk about your shared background if you were both in the Peace Corps or something of that nature. Be prepared for some of that less maybe substantive or structured conversation, because some folks will seek out more of that. Some folks, they just want the policy. They're like, tell me what you want. Okay, if you can relate it to their interest, the interest of their legislator, even better. But it's a lot more direct. So again, that speaks also to that flexibility. I see a question from Martha in the chat. How soon should a group follow up with the representative? Personally, I think sending an email right after the meeting is a good start. And then we log that interaction, we monitor any changes, and then typically check in on a weekly basis. The check-ins have typically in the past happened on the office end, but I think something that we want to really explore more of this go around is how we can be a better support for each of you, so that constituents can be the direct point of follow-up, and every week just check in and say, hey, if we have any, you know, if you need any additional resources, we're happy to provide more info, have a follow-up conversation. We also want to flag, you know, maybe some new related text, what have you, but starting that contact almost immediately after, while it's fresh in their minds, is recommended. Paula, I don't know if you're able to come off of mute, but I do see that you've dropped a really wonderful tidbit in the chat about allowing time to listen and hear from the representative or their staff member, because some of these meetings don't last long. So we need to be prepared to be brief and to the point. I think that's a great point. Yeah, I don't know if Paula is able to come off of mute, but it's a really good point. Sometimes these meetings are very quick. It's an opportunity not only for us to share our viewpoint, but to also get some information from them. It's been highly informative to hear, especially from people who are staunchly opposed to the UN agenda within our jurisdiction, to hear a little bit about what our shared goals are, what can we connect over, or even just hearing the rhetoric offline, you know, when it's not an official speech, of why are they not a fan of the UN? Why do they not believe that this is a priority issue? It can then allow us to be a little more strategic in our approach to other like-minded individuals to say, you know, okay, we understand the misconception that the Paris Climate Agreement restricts American innovation. Let's address that point. So a good point from Paula, that listening is just as important. Any other tips from the group?
I have a quick note. This is actually going to be my first advocacy like campaign, but just I'm the legislative assistant, so I'm doing deep dives into legislation all the time. And I just want to emphasize Paolo's point that if you know their voting record, even just like to the last congressional cycle, or at least just show some familiarity of what they favor in terms of legislation, that will go a long way and would give, a benefit to what we're trying to push. Like, for example, this is actually a reintroduced piece of legislation. In the last cycle, Rep. Lee introduced it as H.Res.30, I think, or 654, and Representative Brown and Representative Holmes Norton were actually co-sponsors. So if we do end up meeting with them or their staff, like that is an instant we have to start a conversation since they've already supported the measure. So just like doing research on what their legislative agendas are, like taking 10 minutes to do it could definitely be helpful.
Absolutely. The amount of times we'd go into a meeting and 10 minutes before we'd hear Ed would go, oh, and they were in the CIA, so let's connect it to that. I mean, it's really beneficial. To close this part of the conversation, I'll also add, sorry, I just got a chat and completely lost my train of thought. So we'll circle back to that. Let's get back to our slides. Pausing here, any questions about H.Res.30 or meeting expectations?
Gina, this is Paula.
Hey,
Thank you
Paula.
for having me and for reading my input on the chat. I agree with all of the very good suggestions for making the most out of these meetings, calls. But one thing that I think also needs to be underscored is that in addition to preparing with talking points, research about voting records, everything we can know in advance about the representative and her work, is also coordinating with the rest of your delegation in advance. It really pays off, particularly when you don't have that much time. So having, someone who would open the conversation and give a very brief point introduction of the organization, and then, assignment of specific issues and highlighting one or two stories from the group. It really pays off to have a group that is well prepared and coordinated.
Thank you for underscoring that, Paula. Absolutely correct. And a good segue into what we'll be doing next. I did remember my point from just before, which is also that oftentimes a lack of co-sponsorship on the end of a specific representative won't necessarily be because they're not interested in it. Oftentimes they just have so much coming across their desk that it's up to us, especially as their constituents oftentimes, to remind them that this is a priority issue for us. It's about, we equip them with the resources they need to make an informed decision, but so much of the importance of what we're doing is just raising attention to these issues because, look, between COVID, between the economy, their thoughts are likely elsewhere. This is an opportunity for us to say, this is no more or less important than anything else. We need it to be included in the agenda. And actually, it's more connected to these issues than you might think. It's not, totally global. We can segue now into our breakout activity, putting these ideas into practice. So if you've participated in this training previously, then you already know what to expect. Congratulations, you've secured a meeting with me, Shayna Vaser. I'm a new senator for the brand new state of the District of Columbia, and I'm on the fence about co-sponsoring a resolution having to do with the SDGs because between all of the other issues on my plate, I just don't really see why this is relevant and warrants my attention. So what we're going to do, we are going to break out into random groups. You're going to have 5 minutes to not only review the material, most of which, we've already kind of conceptually covered today, but to use that time to coordinate as a group who is going to discuss each point. We'll then come back as a group. Each group will have a 5-minute meeting with me or presentation. I'll ask a question, and then as a collective for this entire group that's online right now, we'll offer some feedback. What are some things that we saw or heard that we liked? What are some recommendations to strengthen the points presented? And as a reminder, These are, as Paula was saying, some of the key structures to pull from in terms of what you'll want to be preparing for in the next 5 minutes. Any questions about the breakout activity? All right. So what I'm going to do now is move you into these groups. Make sure you have those resources in front of you from the Google Doc so you can refer to them. Make sure you, again, have a sense of what you need to discuss. I'm going to be listening for. Do you introduce UNA NCA? Do you introduce why you're here? How do you present the issue? Do I hear a clear and concise and distinguishable core ask? And are you able to answer a random question that I throw your way? All right. Are we ready to go, folks? I'm going to open up all the rooms. Welcome back. Thank you for accommodating a breakout activity that tries to replicate the stress and brevity under which we must meet sometimes to prepare for these meetings. So here's how we're going to facilitate. Because I want to uphold my promise to end this within an hour, I don't think we'll have time for all 5 groups to give a 5-minute presentation plus feedback. So we're probably going to have all of the groups go, and then we'll save collective feedback towards the end. So with that said, why don't we start with group 1, which had Alpha, Ed, Marissa, Martha, and Tori. The floor is yours.
Hello, Senator Vaser. So my group is with the UNA NCA, which is part of the UNA USA. We're holding this meeting as part of our Global Leadership Summit. Last year, our planet was undergoing a devastating health, economic, and racial injustice crisis, and we need the UN more than ever to help promote an inclusive agenda for every person with our 17 SDGs. So one point that our group really stressed was how inclusive this agenda is and how it really supports a harmonious and unified people, and also how, while COVID-19 and economic relief are extremely important, each of the 17 SDGs in some way works to uplift those same values. For instance, we looked at SDG 3, good health and wellness, and how while COVID-19 has impacted people's physical wellness as well, it has also impacted mental health. So that is just one of the many ways that the SDGs intersect.
Ed, if you're talking, you are on mute.
I'm Ed Elmendorf, also Senator Vaser from Washington, D.C., but you're a Californian, and for us, I think it's important to stress the relevance of the goals to your particular conditions in California, especially the tendency increasingly towards desertification and the various climate disasters that California has suffered in recent years. The goals are responsive to that kind of circumstance and condition. We hope very much that you would support them.
Pretty much ditto to what the comments of my my colleagues have already said. You know, these goals aren't binding. United States still regulates and implement as see fit, but we are encouraging your support for them because it really helps to build back a better agenda here at home in the great state of California and abroad. So we would like to ask for your support once again today.
Thank you so much. Are those all the comments from group 1?
We'd like to hear from you, Senator.
Well, first and foremost, I want to thank everyone for calling me Senator Vaser with a straight face. I do get a kick out of that. I will give preliminary feedback here before we move to group 2. One thing that I would have liked to hear, I thought you did a great job connecting UNA to the SDGs, making that personal connection. But I wanted to hear the core ask, specifically asking to co-sponsor so that there's no question of what I'm supporting. So I'll leave feedback there. We'll go to the group for full feedback at the end. Let's go to group 2, Anna, Julie, Marcelo, Shivani, and Steve.
Good afternoon, Senator Vaser. We'd love to have this meeting in person, but due to the circumstances, it's great to meet you online. So I'm here with a few of my colleagues from the USA UNNCA, and specifically our organization supports, it's a grassroots movement to support Americans who are dedicated to the work of the United Nations. And our specific focus in the National Capital Area is to connect the Sustainable Development Goals to the local community. And as you know, due to COVID-19 and the impacts across the board on health, economics, there's been an exacerbation of inequity. And we see these global goals and we see this H.Res.30 as an excellent way to bring home the Sustainable Development Goals and help frame our agenda of looking at poverty alleviation and the impacts of COVID as interlinked.
Hi, Senator Vaser. I'm Marcelo, and like Shivani, we live here in DC. And we're very concerned with how the SDGs could be applied locally. These, as you know, range from poverty to climate change to gender equality, and DC, despite having I would say a tremendous amount of growth in the last recent years, it still shows many of those development inequalities that most of the country has. So this bill introduced by Representative Lee would be a non-binding resolution for all of us to agree on the priorities and what would be considered important in developing our great nation.
So in conclusion, Senator Vaser, hello, my name is Julie Choi. I'm a recent graduate from the University of Maryland, so it's very close to DC. So I just want to recognize that COVID and its repercussions economically have been devastating for everyone in the DMV area. So your concerns are very valid. But as a UNA NCA advocacy fellow, I see H.Res.30 being very beneficial for all of your constituents as well as the rest of the United States. So we highly encourage you to sponsor this bill. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Group 2. And I particularly appreciate that you mentioned who introduced the bill. You mentioned Rep. Barbara Lee by name, which helps my team, get organized and know who to reach out to. So really wonderful. Thank you. I want to hear from Group 3, Amy, Cade, Ivana, Jack and Lucia, and Paula.
Great. Good morning, Senator Vaser. My name is Cade Shore, and I'm a legislative assistant with UNA NCA, which is an organization of citizens across DC, Maryland, and Northern Virginia that really care about supporting the vital work of the United Nations. We know this year has been tough, to say the least, from a legislative standpoint, and you've already indicated that you're primarily concerned about economic policy and that which is related to COVID-19. Even just last year, when the United Nations celebrated its 75th anniversary, our attention was turned toward devastating crises across the board. And none of this was helped with the previous administration's inactivity in addressing these problems. But we believe that this is why we need the UN and the SDGs more than ever. I don't know if my other team members are here, but I can keep going. The reason we think the SDGs are so important is because they provide a framework that connects many of the issues that you've been focused on legislatively into kind of a singular framework. If we're focused on COVID-19, economics, racial inequities, those all fit in with the broad scope that the SDGs provide. And so our core ask for you is that you support H.Res.30, which has been introduced by Rep. Barbara Lee. This is actually the second time she's introduced it in the last 2 congressional cycles. And we think that this would allow for a more peaceful, prosperous, and just world by 2030. When I think of it personally, I'm from Southern California, so are you, Senator Vaser, and so we know just how important, for example, climate policy is. Or if you're from Los Angeles, 1 in 5 people have COVID-19. These are issues that face our region specifically, and so we see that a piece of legislation dedicated toward the SDGs would allow us to have a kind of a legislative reset and orient ourselves to more just and peaceful goals. So if my other members are here, they can conclude. If not, I will conclude as well.
Ivana, do we have you there to tell your story?
Yes, I'm so sorry. Here I am. Hi, Senator Vaser. My name is Ivana Adams. I am also part of the team member of UNA NCA. I have a personal experience, mostly like precisely a personal story on why I'm advocating for the SDGs. I am originally from South America, specifically from Venezuela, and so I am kind of like as a refugee in the United States. I also believe that in our area, in the DMV area, we are experiencing some of the two most crucial I believe, in my opinion, struggles, during these times of a crisis with the COVID-19 virus, which is the one that one of the SDGs will be hunger, zero hunger, and the other SDGs will be the other one will be inequality, equality for education. As you probably have heard, we have been encountering people who are suffering from not providing, food for their families since they have been affected strongly from this virus. And on top of that, we have seen communities where children don't have access to internet, or they don't have possessions of electronic devices where they can attend to their schools virtually. So this is two of the SDGs that I'm more concerned about, and this is why I would like for you, Senator, to take in consideration how this can also impact our nation eventually if we don't consider these sustainable development goals to be implemented in our current situation that we're dealing with. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ivana. And group 3, I want to move ahead to groups 4 and 5, but I hope folks might be able to stay for the last 5 minutes or listen to the recording that we'll send out to all of you to get some collective feedback. But thank you so much, group 3. Group 4, Ava, Cassidy, Jada, Charmine, and Naval.
Hello, Senator Vassar. It's a great honor to be meeting with you, even if it's for a brief moment. My name is Cassidy Childs, and I'm a member of UNA NCA, which is an organization that seeks to support the work of the UN in the US. Today we have an exciting opportunity to bring to you, which is that Representative Barbara Lee reintroduced a bill, H.Res.30, to the House, which we are asking you to co-sponsor today. And my colleague, Charmine, will be explaining what H.Res.30 is.
Thank you again, Senator, for having us today. H.Res.30 seeks to reaffirm our commitment to the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And we feel as though now more than ever, it's important for us to recommit to this agenda, because all of these issues, from ending poverty to boosting our economy to gender inequality, are currently at the forefront because of coronavirus. And so we ask that you sponsor this bill, originally introduced by Representative Barbara Lee.
Hi, Senator. My name is Ava, and one of the biggest reasons why I joined UNA USA is because I was really passionate about human rights and equity, which is one of the SDGs in Res 30. And among big cities, DC, your constituency, exhibits one of the highest rates of income inequality.
Hi, Senator. Thank you so much for meeting with us. My name is Naval, and I want to highlight the importance of sustainable development goals in recent times, seeing as how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted your constituency particularly strongly with rising food insecurity, unemployment, and poverty rates. And the SDGs of zero hunger and good health and well-being are deeply relevant to your constituency at this time, and supporting HRes30 could help bring these issue areas to a more prominent spotlight.
Hi, Senator Baser. Thank you so much for your time. My name is Jada. As a founding member of the UN, and with the COVID, we have seen why it matters for global problems to be solved globally, and the UN and the work of the UN should not be put in danger. We have to continue to support, and this bill is going to do exactly that. So we really appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Group 4. Great organization. I really liked and want to commend the segues between folks saying, now my colleague Charmaine is going to talk about this, now my colleague Ava is going to talk about this. Really wonderful. Last but certainly never least, Group 5, Alex, Joseph, Katie, and Martha.
Hi, Senator Vassar. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to meet with us. I am from the United Nations Association of the National Capital Area, and we are here advocating on behalf of House Resolution 30, which was recently reintroduced by Representative Barbara Lee. And really one of the main reasons why we think that this resolution is prudent to be passed by the House is really its structure. It's simply a resolution, it's not necessarily legislation. And so in that regard, it's really just a statement of intention, and it therefore is one of the many mechanisms by which the US can showcase that it is working to bridge the gap between intention and impact in the global playing field. Furthermore, another really important reason as to why the Resolution House 30 is really important in this specific time frame in our collective existence is really because of the last few years. Recently, the US has been pulling out of many strategic alliances and important coalitions. We can see this with everything from the JCPOA to the World Health Organization, which are critically felt in everything from economic policy to health policy to international security. And so this SDG declaration, especially in regard to Goal 17, is just one way in which we can rejoin the fabric of the international playing field and uphold our position as a world leader. And so in that regard, we think that it's really important that you consider supporting this resolution as part of your legislative agenda going forward. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have on the topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think based on my list, you might be the only person still online from Group 5. Am I correct?
I think so.
I think so. Well, good timing because I know a number of folks have to drop off for the next meeting. We're going to stay online for the next 5 minutes or so to do feedback. But if you have to hop off, thank you so much for joining. Really, really wonderful work, especially for some newcomers to the advocacy field. I want to elevate Paula's recommendation here in the chat, which is her recommendation is to ask the congressperson to not only support the resolution or issue at stake, but to also have them speak louder than the other reps to be a champion for global goals and this resolution. A good segue. I'd like to open it up. What are some positive things that you saw and really liked in this exercise?
I can go. I don't know how, like if this is, I guess it is a positive, but I like the small time to prepare. I thought that was really useful to just get straight to the point instead of having a bunch of time to discuss. We basically, they were like, let's just say who talks one and then let's just go. And that really helped me stay focused.
have a comment from Olivia here in the chat that she really liked the quick personal story of why folks joined UNA NCA. I also agree. I thought that a number of groups, group 1, group 3, I think group 2 as well, offered not just, here's what UNA NCA is, but, here's why I joined, here's why I'm passionate about it. I think that's a great way to give it that personal angle. Some other positives from the group.
I think a lot of groups did a good job of connecting H.Res.30 and the SDGs to coronavirus, and really emphasizing how this is an issue that is very current and needs our attention.
I felt that I was in group 3, and I mentioned that I was basically ignorant of H.30, and I have participated in advocacy groups, but with H.30, I appreciated the various groups commenting directly on H.30. What I'm wondering about, and we'll look at this later, is what exactly is H.30 supposed to do? It's one thing to advocate for cutting money for the defense budget or adding money to a particular program, food stamps.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to be clear, what is H.30 going to do that we would like them to sign on to? What, is it just intentional?
I think
it's not just advocating, because we're going to be about trying to get people in our own communities to advocate as well. And they're going to want to know what exactly is it going to do.
This is a really great point and a good segue into some of the constructive feedback. This, I think, is more of a byproduct of the fact that we gave you 5 minutes to prepare for it. But highlighting that this is a resolution, it's signaling support for the SDGs. So we're talking about, conceptually, this is why it's important, but we're not obligating any sort of substantive action. It's more so recognizing the link between the SDGs and between local action. And like Paula mentions in the chat, you'll get, you have your briefing materials, so you'll have that information. But I think, Jack, to your point, it's really important to make that clear in the meeting. We can't assume that they've read the legislation before our meeting. So we also don't want to scare them and say, we're committing to anything, but just to be very clear about what is included in the bill. Jada, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I think one of the important things that I realized was that some of the groups addressed you personally, and that you're from California and gave information specific to you. I think it matters that we know the person that we're speaking to, that we'll be addressing, to allow them to connect to us.
I totally agree. And if you go the step further and you read my bio on the website, being able to also connect maybe to some of the issues. So if you're using the environmental angle, being able to reference any major votes or pieces of legislation that I've promoted or championed that have to do with environment is really critical. So I'll echo Jada. I thought you all did a really fantastic job of trying to bring a level of that into this simulation. Any final comments or questions before we wrap for today?
Shana, just let me underscore Paula's comment in the chat here about emphasizing when we're a constituent. It's really important for the member whom we're asking something to do to communicate that we vote for you, in effect. We support you. We're a part of your community.
Absolutely. It's a measure of accountability. Yeah, I think
these people are responsible to us.
It's true. And one other constructive comment I would make, which is difficult, especially because some folks might be new to UNA NCA, I think Paula probably does a better job than anyone of talking about very briefly, UNA NCA is more than advocacy. We have a global education program within the jurisdiction of these representatives. So being able to connect our core ask and what we're doing to what we also give to the community and our role within it, I think is also important, because it also sort of implies, one, it's not just us, we have a broader network of constituents who vote for them, but also it should be a priority if we're working with their constituents, even if they're not members, if we're working with children, and we're doing, working with these direct service providers. That's just another reason for us to be in partnership with one another. We're an important organization for them to have on their radar. So something to keep in mind. Let us break here. Thank you all for sticking around. Thank you for watching the recording. If you're watching this recording, I've left my email, shana@unanca.org, in the chat. You can also contact us at takeaction@unanca.org. Be on the lookout. We'll be sending out this recording as well as those resources this week. And we'll also have updates about those rolling confirmations for meetings. I'm always available for questions. Please use CADE as a resource as well. Thank you so much for participating, and have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining.